Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another top 5 Total War video, this time covering the top 5 worst Total War games, based on my personal opinion. I acknowledge that every Total War game is somebody's favorite, even the least popular Total War games, somebody loves, and that's totally fine. But these are the 5 that I've had the worst experience with, or feel absolutely nothing towards. And so if I say anything that upsets you, feel free to rip into me, because if I can rip into these games that might be one of your favorites, it's only fair that you rip into me. So jump into the comment section and, Legend, how dare you say this about my favorite game? You need to play with this mod and this mod and this mod, and feel free to say anything like that. It's all good. We can still be friends. I'll even chuck you a heart in the comment section. So yeah, I hope we can have different tastes and still be friends. Now, another thing is on the previous video, which was the top 5 best Total War games based on my opinions, you guys astutely realized that it was a very heavily scripted and edited video. We wanted to try a different style and see how you guys responded to it, and you guys gave us a lot of really useful feedback. I think one of the issues that we had with it was that I'm usually recording these in sort of like one take, shoot from the hip, no real script, and I can get into a bit of a frenzy when I'm talking about Total War sometimes, because I'm very passionate about it. And when I write a script, I don't put that frenzy or that passion into the script. Instead, what I did was just focus in on the core points. And that probably reflected into the final product and being, I guess, very sanitized. And I think you guys, for the most part, very much noticed it. But what we're doing with these 2 videos here is we've got one option, the heavily sanitized version, so that's the previous one, and then this one here. Today is going to be a very raw Legend of Total War video. No script, minimal editing. I'm just going to give my opinions. I'm going to rip into some of these games. You let me know in the comments below if you've watched both of them, which style you prefer, because if you would prefer more sanitized videos with less personality, it's definitely something that we can do better with, because that was like one of the first ones we've even done that way. So I just need more practice with it, because I'm obviously more used to shooting from the hip. So your feedback helps us greatly in producing better videos that you want to see. So please continue to give us feedback. We're trying to figure out how best to entertain you guys. All right. Okay, so let's get into the top 5 itself. Let's see here. So number 5. Number 5 is going to be Total War Attila, because no matter what I put on this list, people are going to have a problem with it. And I know that some people really love Total War Attila. I'm going to be saying the same thing about every single one of these games. But something's got to be the worst, right? They can't just be everything be the best. But when it comes to Total War Attila, I think about my own personal experience with it and all the things that I think that are really bad with Total War Attila. In terms of the battles, I think it's quite good. Give it the benefit of the doubt with some areas of it. It's not all bad. It's not like it's a complete waste of a product. The battles in Total War Attila are great. I like the fact that you can kill the enemy general and actually has some impact on the enemy army, as opposed to Rome 2, which is like minimal impact, or even Total War Warhammer, minimal impact by killing the enemy general in most cases. But in Total War Attila, the battles, they've got a lot of good features. The optimization is bad, but that's beating a dead horse with that one at this point. The thing that kills Total War Attila for me really is the Grand Campaign. I like a big campaign map just like anyone else, but the Grand Campaign for Total War Attila, in my opinion, is one of the worst that there is in any Total War game, because of all the backwards game design, all those player traps. I don't like seeing loads of player traps. A couple of them is fine. Every Total War's got them, but Attila is riddled with them. Things like the Hun invasion, when you're disincentivized to actually wipe out enemy armies because they'll just come back instantly at full strength. Just dumb. And things like building up your certain resources to upgrade your building, and it will like cause more problems than it will solve. It doesn't make sense. When certain technologies actually like remove buildings available to you, where upgrading certain units actually causes them to be less valuable because their upkeep cost goes higher than the stats that they are provided. It's just, they've got so much backward game design. Diplomacy is awful, but that was part of the course back then. It really does come down to the campaign in Total War Attila. Just for me personally, just really wasn't fun. I've given this game so many tries, and I can't honestly say I've ever played it and thought to myself, oh yeah, I'm having a great time in this campaign. It's always been, I hate this element of the campaign. It's not the worst, but it is so far from the best, which is why I put Total War Attila at the number 5 spot there. Moving on to number 4, Total War Empire. I expect this will be the title that I get the most pushback on. Maybe that on number 1, we'll see. So Empire Total War is getting a bit of a re-release on mobile, and I could not give a shit about that. because, for one thing, I don't play Total War games on mobiles. I don't play any mobile games for that matter. But Empire Total War is one of the games that I've had the worst experiences with. When Rome 1 and Medieval 2 came out, I couldn't have been a bigger fan of Total War. So I pre-ordered Empire Total War, went over to the store, picked it up back in 2009, plugged it into my computer, had to load up Steam for the first time. It was the first game I ever put on Steam. And then I played a single campaign of it, uninstalled it, and didn't play it again for like 5 years because I was so underwhelmed with it. Now, that was obviously the launch version of Empire Total War, which, everybody can acknowledge is pretty bad. But I have given Empire Total War another attempt many, many times over the years, when I eventually did come back to Total War. Because Empire Total War put such a bad taste in my mouth that I actually skipped Napoleon. I didn't actually purchase Napoleon when it first came out. I skipped Napoleon entirely and just purchased another Total War game at Shogun 2. And I think that any Total War game that causes such a bad taste in your mouth, it's got to go on a worst list, right? And Empire Total War's core issues are... it really does depend on what you care about in a Total War game. Like, I'm trying to be really careful, tiptoe around people's feelings here. There are some elements of Empire Total War that are really cool. I liked the naval battles. They're a bit buggy, but they were some of the best in any Total War game, of those that even have naval battles. But it's not enough to draw me into the game. I don't care enough about naval battles to be like, oh, everything else about the game is crap, but at least it's got naval battles. Yeah, that doesn't do enough for me. I didn't think the campaign mechanics were that good. I liked the fact that it basically included the entire world. That's cool. But in terms of the actual amount of detail in each province, I thought it was actually less than what came before it, and less than what came after it as well. I get that as the population grew in some regions, it would new settlements, small settlements would pop up, but a lot of the times those were very cookie cutter. It's just the same thing over and over again. You'd have the same building built multiple times, and that didn't really interest me very much. The economy system was a little bit basic, especially when you compare it to Rome 1 and Medieval 2. So the Empire system on the campaign is not that bad. What really lets it down, I think, is just how bad the AI is, both in diplomacy and in regard to how they maneuver their armies around, especially in regard to moving navies around with armies. But the real thing that causes this to be on the list is how bad the land battles are in Empire Total War. Because the AI is atrocious, for one thing, even after all the patches. And if you're going to sit there and say, oh, but Legend, try it with Darth Mod. I did try it with Darth Mod, and I didn't like it anymore. So the AI is bad, the pathfinding is bad, the pacing of the battles, I think, are really bloody slow. I'm not really interested in spending 45 minutes on a battle, especially when the AI is known for, spamming out loads and loads of stacks. You just end up grinding through a campaign and just spending a lot of time on it. Which isn't a win for me. I want to sort of feel like there's some progress going on with my victories. And another thing is that the characters are just so one-dimensional. You just recruit a general by pressing on a unit and going, promote to general. You get a new general, and he's got one or two traits that don't really make that big of an impact. And they have next to no voice lines across any of the factions. They don't have to do a pre-battle speech. They lost that from Medieval 2. You don't really have any real attachment to your head of state. They're just provide a small bonus. You can't really do anything with them either. So there's a lot of governance in Empire Total War that just feels really flat. There are definitely some good ideas that just really should have been fleshed out a lot more. And so Empire Total War is really a big not recommend from me. Just because I think it's one of those games that just has too many issues to really be able to recommend it. However, I do want to acknowledge that those people who love 18th century warfare, it's going to be difficult to find another game that's going to be able to provide a similar gameplay experience, because there's just not that many out there. But when it comes down to it, if you're looking for gunpowder warfare, there is a Total War game that offers a vastly better experience in pretty much every single way, which is Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai. But I also think that a lot of people just would prefer to have that kind of gameplay, except in Europe. And if that's the case, I'm all for that. I'm all for taking Shogun 2's actual AI and how the units perform and the pacing of the battles and bring that over to Empire. I would be all for it. It would basically fix my issues. But until that happens, I just can't recommend this game. So that's why it's going in at number 4 on my list. Moving on to number 3, Total War Saga Troy. So this game here is a bit different because I don't feel anger towards it like I do the other two. Like with Empire and Attila, there were aspects of it that just like made me angry and made me hate the game, right? But Troy, I don't have like an anger or hatred towards it because at the end of the day, the game was free. And I think what I feel for Troy is actually apathy. Like, I don't care about this game at all. It feels like a Epic exclusive cash grab, and it kind of worked for Creative Assembly. I'm just like, oh no, you know, you do you, it's all good. And there were other games out at the time. Like, Troy was competing for my attention with Warhammer 2 and Three Kingdoms. And comparing it, it's just like, it's night and day. Like, Troy just has nothing in comparison to those games to offer. It's not to say that the Bronze Age isn't that interesting. I know for most people it's not really the most interesting time period. I try not to judge these games based on their time period too much, but I know that the Bronze Age isn't going to have as much flair as you know, more developed times, you know, further in the human timeline. Just as technology advances, obviously different unit types will become available. You can't expect Troy to be walking around with muskets. It's ridiculous. But the whole heroes side of things had really sort of played its part, especially with Warhammer and Three Kingdoms. And Troy was kind of like, it didn't really improve upon any of the issues that were already there. Like with the pathfinding issues, the siege issues, you just don't really feel very attached to your other generals just because you've got this one larger than life character. Like if you're playing Achilles, for example, it just doesn't feel like you got attached to them. The battles just feel really flat. And when it came down to it, I tried to give Troy a few playthroughs. I've never finished a single campaign of Troy. I just got bored. That's really what it came down to. And I think that there's one, if you're playing a game and it's too hard to finish, that's one thing. That's a skill issue. But I was well on my way to conquering the map. And I was just like, I'm going to do something else. And I just never came back to it. And I think that is a completely different issue. Having apathy towards your campaigns is like, don't give a shit. And that's what I felt for Troy. I think the campaign aspect, there's some good elements to it, especially with the bartering system. But for the most part, Troy just didn't do it for me. There were just better Total War games out. And I just don't recommend you buy Troy because I got it for free. And if you're buying it now, you're not going to get it for free. And it's kind of only worth it if you get it for free, in my opinion. And do you know what the funny thing here is? I think most of you guys will agree with me because nobody plays Troy anymore. Some of the old Total War games like Rome Total War and especially Medieval 2, they're still played by thousands of people every day. Troy, hardly anyone. It's just one of those games that fell flat and nobody cares about. Didn't piss anyone off because they didn't abandon it too early or it wasn't particularly poorly optimized. It looks really nice. But as far as a game is concerned, it falls so flat. But free is free. So let's move on now to number 2, which is Thrones of Britannia. This one here, another Total War saga. Man, the sagas didn't really have a good run of it, did they? So the problem with Thrones of Britannia, you did have to pay for this one, and I've got a pretty bad history with it. I think that because it is built off Total War Attila, fundamentally, the bones of it Total War Attila, and it has fewer features than Total War Attila. And the features that they added into it feel bland because it's mostly dilemma based. And I don't really like lots of dilemmas in a Total War game. And I feel like dilemmas do better when you're playing Paradox games. And so it felt like Thrones of Britannia was an attempt to try to be more like Paradox, but also be less like Total War, which it kind of has an identity crisis with that because what's wrong with just embracing what you are? Yeah, like the campaign side of things with Total War is never going to be as good as Paradox. But Paradox can't compete with the battles. Now, the battles in Thrones of Britannia are admittedly pretty good, but they're really not that different from Attila. You've got way less unit variety, though, so that's a downside. I mean, obviously in a more localized area, that's going to happen. But I think one of the biggest problems with Thrones of Britannia is that it feels content poor. Like having a big DLC button in the middle of the menu and there being only the blood pack, it's lame. And I think that every culture feels too similar to another. There wasn't enough distinct features to really separate the Anglo-Saxons from the Viking settlers, I suppose, and from the Irish and the Welsh and from the Scottish. They all played a very similar way. They all build their armies exactly the same, all utilized more or less the same units, the same similar tactics in the battlefield with the shield wall being a priority, with not that much cavalry. There were, of course, unique mechanics to each of the starting factions that you can play as, but those weren't distinct enough, in my opinion, to really give you a whole lot of replay value with Thrones of Britannia. So with this game, it just really felt like it just doesn't have much to do in it, because I'd already played Total War Attila for 3 years, and I just wasn't looking for more Total War Attila, except less. That's kind of how I describe Thrones of Britannia. It's Total War Attila, but less. And Total War Attila is already on this list, so if it's less Total War Attila, it's not going to get a high ranking from me. Anyway, moving on to the number 1 spot, which is going to piss off a lot of people, Total War Pharaoh, which I am not going to be fair to. No, I'm just kidding. So here's the thing with Total War Pharaoh. This is the only Total War game I have never actually played. And you probably sit there and go, oh, but Legend, you can't judge something that you haven't played. You should at least give it a shot. You know, I've heard this before. Here's the thing. Total War Pharaoh gets the exact same treatment as Troy from me. I don't care about it. Pharaoh's fundamental issue is that it was a game designed for a very small number of people, I guess. It just didn't have wide appeal. It is the lowest sold Total War game of all time by a very large margin. People don't play it to this day very much. It is, you know, it is the newest Total War game, even after the Dynasties update, and it is pale in comparison to just even like Medieval 2, Rome 1 has more players. Just about every single non-Total War Saga game has more players than Pharaoh. Oh, but Legend, you can't just judge the game by how many people currently play it. Yeah, I know that. It can't be the only thing you judge it on. I get that, and it can be a very stale argument. But here's the thing. Total War Pharaoh is built off the bones of Troy. I didn't care about Troy. Why should I care about Pharaoh? They've just taken the exact same game and moved it over. In fact, it even covers the same period now, same area, because they've imported content from Troy into Pharaoh. It's not a problem of lack of content. It's a problem of lack of interest. I just don't have any interest in Pharaoh. It's not inherently a bad game. It just doesn't appeal to me in any way, shape, or form, because other better Total War games are out. But even when I think about older Total War games like Rome 1 and Medieval 2, you know, if I can only play one Total War game at a time, Total War Pharaoh, in terms of my personal desire to play it, is always at the bottom. Would I rather play Rome 1 or Pharaoh? I'd rather play Rome 1. Am I going to play Warhammer 3 instead of Pharaoh? Well, it's going to be Warhammer 3. There's pretty much any time that you can make that comparison, I'll always choose something other than Pharaoh. You know, am I going to play Space Marine 2 instead of Pharaoh? Yes, definitely going to play Space Marine 2. There are so few games that I would rather play Pharaoh than that it wouldn't even be worth mentioning it. So when it comes to Pharaoh, I'm not saying it's a bad game. I'm saying I have so little interest in this game because it was just an obvious reskin cash grab. I'm just not interested in it. And I don't think I need to say anything more than that, because at the end of the day, barely anyone else even plays it anyway. But I understand that those of you who do play it probably think that this is an excellent game, and that's great. I'm glad you enjoy it. The problem with this game isn't that it has bad game design, is that it's appealing to such a narrow audience, which is why it's the worst sold Total War game of all time. And in my opinion, that should, if nothing else, qualify it for being the worst Total War game. You can judge a game based on so many different metrics, and it's really up to you guys which metric you want to decide to judge a game. I'm judging it based on interest. When it comes down to which games I would prefer to play, Total War Pharaoh is literally at the very bottom. I would play any of these other Total War games before I ever even considered playing Pharaoh. So, I'm just never going to touch it. There's just no interest. And the game is dead now. They're not developing it any further. There might be like 1 or 2 patches, but that's about it. So I really can't say anything more about that. I don't want to dump on it too much because, again, they did do the best they could, I guess, in trying to revive it. But in my opinion, it utterly failed. Anyway, that's my list here. Let me know in the comments below how wrong I am about my opinions. But at the end of the day, it is just personal tastes. If you disagree, you're more than free to do so. And I will see you guys in the next video. I appreciate all your feedback, and we'll see you next time, friends. I bet you thought I was going to say something else. Later.